For Sunday, August 30th, 2020. This is the Pro and Con Show, and I'm your host, Michael James Ott, and as always, welcome to the show. So, trying to encourage us all to be better citizens, better neighbors, better family members, by hopefully opening up to this concept that we are being, we are allowing ourselves basically to be controlled into these tribes that the people, the puppeteers, if you will, using a lot of terms, very basic terms, very basic propaganda to cause us to separate into the Hatfields and the McCoys, the us versus them, Democrats versus Republicans, yada, 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 okay? And the truth is that we want to be centrist. Most of us want to be centrist. Some of us more right-leaning, some of us more left-leaning, but basically much very centrist. But you can't. And why do the puppeteers, pick these certain issues? Because they know that they can really press the hot button on those the buttons of emotion, because they're strongly held beliefs, like the whole thing around abortion. This is a very strong issue, a very polarizing issue, because we've allowed it to be, and because the people who try to control us into these tribes, they've simplified the argument, grossly oversimplified the argument, by the way, grossly oversimplified the issue, and thereby separated us into two separate tribes. And it's actually today's show talking about disagreements, arguments. I call today's show Family Court. Family Court. Now this is an idea, and I haven't read anyone else actually talking about this idea, but I'm sure, with billions of people on the planet over the course of history, there's probably lots of people who've had the idea. So I don't want to infer that I'm some kind of great genius. But I'm not talking about family court in the way that we think about family court today. So-called family court today is, well, we are arguing over our divorce, and so the judge has to decide how we're going to allocate the marital property or whatever, or the children of a marriage, what are the visitation rights, who has custody, all that kind of stuff. That's family court today. And my idea, or an idea that I have, again, I'm sure other people have had, but it certainly feels like a great idea. It would address things within the family in a way that hopefully would prevent a lot of divorces. It would prevent a lot of domestic violence, domestic anger and frustration. And that is, just imagine if in whatever relationship you're in, if you're in a relationship, let's say you have a spouse, okay? And you and your spouse, okay, there's things you agree on and so on, but there are things you don't agree on, like whether you should buy a new car or instead go on a vacation or something like that. And sometimes those disagreements can build into very strong emotional anger on the part of one or both spouses. And that can cause domestic violence, that can cause, divorce, that can cause, all kinds of issues in the relationship. So just imagine if there was kind of this family court, this basically court of appeals. So what you could do is there would be a panel, an independent panel, maybe there's very, in your community or maybe outside of your community. So there could be a totally independent panel, people that don't know you, they're not your family members, because the problem with, like, if you go to counseling or if you go to if you go to counseling, for example, well, that's one independent person, but it's just one. And it's very common for one spouse or the other to go, well, this counselor is siding with you. But if I had many people, I think some of them would side with me. This whole kind of concept of basically allowing us as individuals to get feedback. Is our position on this extreme in some way or not? And that is something that we don't have. If you're talking to friends and family members, they're going to be biased to agree with you, because they're your family, they're your friends. And yes, you'll get some opposing view kind of stuff, but mostly they're going to be heavily biased into agreeing with you. And your spouse, if they talk to their family and their friends, and so it doesn't help. You need to have an independent panel that you can go to and you can say, okay, here's what's going on. This is the history, and both sides lay out, this is what I see, what I perceive, what I've been experiencing, and this particular issue is causing a tremendous amount of pain and suffering and anger and anguish between us. And we would like you, the 9 members of a panel, or 11 members of a panel, or 13 members of a panel, 7 members of a panel, to review the information that we're giving you, and then secretly decide how would you come down on this and why. Okay? You don't even, the panel doesn't have to, say, well, I was on the side of the husband or the wife or whatever. They can just say, here's how I think that the husband was right, or I think that the wife was right, and here's my reasoning behind that, just a few words or whatever they wanted to write, and then that's it. That's their vote. And then what would happen is the spouse that took this to family court, the spouses, they would get this report back, and it would say, there was a 9-member panel and they voted 7-2 in favor of the wife. And here's comments that they made about what they thought was rational and reasonable and fair. And you would get that feedback. And then you could just go, well, that's great, because one of the huge issues that we all have, all of us have, is that it's hard for us to judge how fair we're being, how reasonable we're being, because it's just us, okay? And so I'm, a fairly introspective person, and, trying to always figure out, be self-aware. Okay, this whole thing around trying to be as self-aware as possible. But even so, how do you know? And the best way to know, at least my feeling is, my belief is, I would love it so I've been married twice and had all kinds of issues in those relationships, and it just feels like things would have been so much better, and perhaps I'd still be in the first marriage, for example, if I had a way, or my spouse at the time and I both had a way to take some of these most important arguments about, how our children are to be raised, or how the money's supposed to be spent, or where we're going to live, or what kind of job changes we're going to make, or whatever the issues are that we're really struggling with. We could go to an independent panel of an odd number of people and just make our case and get feedback. And I think you'd see the level of domestic violence and divorce and legal separation and all the other, and hate and angst and fighting in the various domestic relationships that are out there. I think you would see them plummet if this were available to one and all. So not the family court like we talk about today, which is divorce court basically, but the family court where you and I in our relationships can go and make our case and get independent feedback from the people outside of our relationships, outside of our families, outside of our circle of friends. It would make all the difference in the world, in my opinion. For the Pro and Con Show, my name is Michael James Ott, and until the next show, bye for now.